And for those who aren't familiar, what the doctor's referencing is it's been 600 years since a pope has left the job, if you will, and that has resigned. So will there be a new precedent to this of sorts? And I think, at least from my vantage point, and I think there's a few key items here. And I think if anybody's deluding themselves that this is going to be some major reformer or that this is going to be a progressive pope, they haven't looked at the bio and they don't know who the person is. But while it may seem inside baseball, they have to clean up Rome right now. Benedict either was not well served or surrounded himself by people who did not serve him well, but beyond financial mismanagement there, obviously with the abuse scandal, Rome had fingerprints on it should have been more active, or it was active in the wrong way, but nonetheless it was part of the problem, not the solution right now. You can't do this on the edges. He has to really clean house, doesn't he?
Yes and no. He does have to, yes, he does have to right the ship to some extent, and he needs to be someone who also personally seems like the kind of person who would right the ship. So there are some kind of optics going on there. On the other hand, you know, the Vatican charges forward. It keeps going. It's been through worse. It may go through worse again. And it does, the work of the church is large. The church has reaches into all corners of the earth. And it does sort of, I mean, I'm amazed at this because there's sometimes when I hear things, I think, oh boy, now. But actually the church seems to go on. So I think it will be fixed to some extent.
But you'll agree they have one of two choices, which is one, and I've heard both here, if you, from the pew perspective, you hear one that says, you know what, after the abuse scandal, and after the math that says there's fewer people in the pews in North America and Europe, there's fewer dollars going into the offertory baskets, there's fewer priests that are signing up for vocations right now, look at the seminaries for crying out loud, and then finally, parochial schools are shuttering and they're not opening wherever you look, at least around here. That they can either say, okay, well, you know what, that's a call to arms that we have to make some changes. Maybe not as radical as some would want, but we have to make some changes, letting priests marry, letting women in the priesthood, whatever the case may be. Or two, it says, and I've heard this as well, well, you know what, we don't want the people who are only going to come on Easter and Christmas. We want the truly committed here. And maybe we have a smaller, more committed church is a better church. That's not what I heard today from this Pope, by the way. No. But it seems that it's an either or. You can't have it both ways.
Well, on the one hand, the places where the church is growing do not have the problems that the first world is having with the church. And so, to some extent, the fact that he's socially conservative. Yep. He certainly toes the line on all the issues that are somewhat up for grabs in the U.S. church. I would also want to point out that he's also in Argentina. He held off against sort of clericalism. Some people didn't want to, for example, baptize the children of unwed mothers, but he said, no, we're doing that.
In strong language,
he's a very pastoral person who truly believes in kind of the deep story of Catholic Christianity.
Feed the hungry and clothe the naked.
Yes, and he's going to put that out front. You know, on the other hand, there's a new Pew study came out today that said, in some ways, while strong Protestants are remaining high in numbers, you know, strongly identified Catholics are down in numbers. It doesn't mean that the overall numbers are down, but the strongly identified Catholics are down in numbers. And so that vision of a smaller, purer church might indeed be smaller than one would think.
We've got a lot to get to over the next 60 minutes. And as you can see from the doctor and myself, we're very vested in where the direction of a church that we obviously care about will be going here, and it will have to make some choices. Before I bring in our next call, I wanted to bring Andrew and Dominic in. And guys, you guys can take the 10,000-foot view a little bit closer than us, maybe. Without the politics or even the policy of it, the picture of it. It is something that you don't see. And whenever we in this business we get to see history, it's a neat thing, and I'm sure, you know, you watched at 2 o'clock when the white puff of smoke came up, and then you saw the imagery that then followed about an hour later. What was your takeaway from today?
I was sort of sharing the excitement of the people who were in the crowd, curiosity in that hour that we were waiting from the white puff of smoke until we know who the new pope was going to be.
It's not just a Catholic event. There's a global event.
No, absolutely, and with so many. Just from the selection leading potentially to so many different areas of focus for the church away from where it had been. I was curious, would it be an American Pope? Would it be an African Pope? And what would the differences mean? What would it mean having an Argentinian Pope now? One of my first thoughts was when I lived in Corpus Christi, Texas, to the Hispanic Catholic community there, and what this must mean for Hispanic Catholic communities across the U.S. and across the hemisphere. One of the faster growing, but also spiritually, if I can say, ardent. And so I can only imagine the reverberations in other communities across the country.
And you know, Dominic, you've got to cover a lot of events. We joke around. You've been on C-130s and not enjoyed it for a second. You've been to some of the hottest places on the planet, as you say, Africa hot. And you've covered all sorts of events here. But you haven't been to Vatican City. And you said it's a place I want to go. It is. We saw this 8 years ago at the passing of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict coming in. But it really is. I was saying today, 3 people can't keep a secret nowadays, especially with phones. You had 115 people in there, and the world knew it was going to wait an hour until the curtains opened up, and then that person stepped before. It's a unique, there isn't anything like this, and you're privileged if you see it a few times in your lifetime.
Very unique, very privileged if you can be there. One way or another, I do plan to get to Rome. I don't know how, whether I'll be covering the story, but it was amazing to watch this new Pope today. I am honored to hear that he is a man of the poor, a very humble type man that stands up for, as you just said, Doctor, you know, unwed mothers and so on, the type of work that he's done. And so the Pope prior to the one we just had was more personality driven. Yep. So we'll see, you know, what's the personality of this Pope. But I like what I hear thus far, and I think he's going to take what he's done and make it on a global stage.
Well, we shall see. Communication, everybody agrees, will be so critical, especially in today's day and age, but not to just speak to, but to speak with the laity. We've heard it before. We'll see if it takes this time. I want to bring with us on the phone right now, we're pleased to be joined by Pamela Shea Barnes. She's the Vice President of the University Ministry at St. John's University, and in this role, she's responsible for the animation of both faith and reflection at university locations, and she holds a doctorate of ministry from the Seminary of Immaculate Conception. Welcome. Thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Happy to be with you.
Listen, I'll say it so you don't have to. I was hoping Dolan from our neck of the woods, the Cardinal, would be selected. I still think that would have been the best decision for that kind of a personality for this church. But be that as it may, were you surprised by today's selection, and do you think in the end it advances the church's best case?
Yeah, you know, I think we were, all New Yorkers were hoping for Cardinal Dolan, I'm sure. I know our students were very excited at the possibility of the Cardinal. I had the privilege of being over in Rome last week on our Rome campus, and so many of our students were just delighted that they were going to be there in Rome for this announcement, and many of them were, in fact, in the square today. And they certainly were pulling for Cardinal Dolan. You know, the Holy Spirit knew better. The Holy Spirit, I think, really guided the cardinals to make the decision that is best for the church at this moment. And I think it's an exciting one. I think the symbolism of the name that he has chosen is really his first moment of teaching of who he is and perhaps really who the church can be.
Well, if I could ask you, Pamela, because you have a unique perspective, given that you're at a university, and the one thing that everybody knows if they've been involved in the church, or at least north of 40, the church is getting older. It's not just at the front of the church, but also the people that fill the pews. You're around 18 to 20-something-year-olds on a regular basis, and while you're at a Catholic college, I've spoken to priests at colleges that aren't religiously affiliated, but they notice that things have changed in recent years. If this pontiff is going to have outreach with deliverables to younger audiences, what do you think, if you gave them some free advice, the messaging ought to be, especially in this part of the world?
You know, I honestly think, and I think that not only on the campus of St. John's, but on college campuses across the country, there is a deep desire and interest in spirituality and in young people connecting. We are not only in a generation right now that we're calling the unchurched generation, but the students on our college campuses are now beginning to be the children of the unchurched generation. There's opportunity in that. Students come to us often with sometimes very little baggage about maybe organized religion and are very open to wanting to connect spiritually and then kind of understand that in the framework of faith. So at St. John's, they kind of understand that through our Roman Catholic tradition. Even in the midst of the great diversity of our campus, Catholic and non-Catholic, that kind of understanding of how we find God in the midst of their daily lives is something that I think in the last few hours, in the very quick study that I've done of Pope Francis, I have seen he's a man who's pretty credible in that regard.
Well, Pamela, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Now what I'd like to do is, the panel and I are going to take a break, but before we do, I want you at home to join our program here, whether you're Catholic or you just want to share your reaction to the selection of Pope Francis. We'd love to hear from you, 38766-2428. And if you do care and root for the success of this church, what do you think needs to happen? And what kind of messaging do you want to see from Pope Francis? We all agree that he's got challenges that lie ahead, some of which are of this church's own making, from my perspective. What needs to happen differently with this Pope than maybe some of his predecessors? We'll be right back with your reaction and much more. Again, our toll-free number, 38766-2428. Please stay with us.